are guilty, but I apologize. This traditional Afghan poem laments how civilians pay the price for American failures. Remember the international headlines from this summer? Government collapse, Taliban takeover, hijacked military equipment, and refugees packing their cargo planes. That hellish reality in Afghanistan is ongoing. Currently, 24 million people are facing life-threatening food insecurity, and 9 million are approaching famine. The main cause? The New York Times reports the Afghan economy is held hostage by U.S. sanctions. The war never ended, just shifted from a war of guns and bombs to a devastating war of money. In addition to sanctions, $10.5 billion of IMF reserves and assets have been seized and frozen. 3/4 of public spending and half of GDP has vanished into thin air. Worse, these measures don't work. Chokeholding the economy punishes innocent civilians, while on the other hand, the Taliban stay rich from their drug trafficking. If anything, our measures push the starving populace to the Taliban for relief, boosting their recruitment. The U.S., historically an extremely destabilizing force in Afghanistan, is obligated to fix this crisis. During the Cold War, our lawmakers essentially thought, you know what communists hate? Religion. You know who is religious? Fundamentalist groups. Yeah, basically, the U.S. gave money and guns to terrorists, extremist mujahideen, to do our dirty work fighting Soviets. The American military trained terrorists how to do suicide bombings. We were remarkably lacking in foresight. Fast forward to last month. A newly signed executive order dictates that 35% of the assets America seized will go to unspecified aid for Afghans. Imagine, someone hacks all your bank accounts, steals everything, and says, oh, don't worry, a third of it's going into a trust fund that I control to help you escape poverty. You know, now that I've just plunged you into inescapable poverty. Would you trust them? Even if the U.S. throws money at the problem, the UN, International Rescue Committee, and Red Cross have warned Biden with unanimous consensus that no amount of aid comes anywhere close to compensating for the destruction of Afghanistan's financial system. 40 Congresspeople agree, yet Biden still has yet to lift these oppressive and exploitative policies. Look, there is no easy solution, but clearly we need change, and the first step towards informed policymaking is information. But our politicians are either gate-kept from investigating or outright refuse to acknowledge the consequences of their actions. Last month, Representative Camila Jayapal sponsored an amendment for Congress to formally study the effect of their economic policies. But 44 House Democrats joined every House Republican to block its passage. When contacted, not a single one provided an explanation. Our measures, our policies, are impractical and morally destructive, but politically convenient, as an ignorant public allows politicians to sidestep domestic backlash. Look at the media. During the war, TV news coverage was negligible. 5 minutes in all of 2020, 345 minutes in just August 2021, then in the months since September, 21 minutes. Reflect for me. How much or how little have you heard about this months-long crisis? Yeah, that's what scares me. Fast-changing headlines condition Americans to feel the appropriate amount of remorse and move on while the crisis worsens by the day. This directly contradicts 20 years of government rhetoric about our investment in Afghanistan. The U.S. is the arbiter of justice, forever the white savior, but only when it's convenient to take responsibility for our actions. We prefer to forget, but since we can't learn from our mistakes, 70% of U.S. interventions fail to foster democracy. Look, the analysis that I'm making here and what I'm trying to talk about is basically just a reflection of my own experiences, because not everyone has the luxury of ignorance. The U.S. has for too long ignored the cycle of intervention and complacency, and it has to stop now. It weighs on me as a Middle Eastern person and child of refugees to see this happen. The U.S. considers its failing foreign policy measures worth more than my entire extended family in Iran, as well as millions of families in Cuba, Venezuela, and Afghanistan. How many more people are to be treated as disposable? We have a responsibility to vote, donate, educate, demand reparations and an end to seizures and sanctions, lobby our representatives to do their jobs and study the effects of their policies, and open our hearts and minds and borders to refugees and immigrants. This solution necessitates a commitment to anti-racism. For too long, white lives have been valued over black and brown ones. And indeed, when looking to the refugee crisis today, it's evident, because when the media is calling migrants of color uncivilized and not Western enough, it justifies ignoring their suffering. Every refugee, regardless of ethnicity, nation of origin, or religion, deserves refuge. We must remember equality as we grapple simultaneously with the crises in Ukraine, Afghanistan, and across the world. Paul Spiegel, director of Johns Hopkins, reports that unless we act now, U.S. policies will kill more people than the Taliban. Afghan women like Zaida agree. How on earth does the West think they are improving our prospects when we can't feed our families? You can live without freedom, but you can't live when you have nothing to eat. Thank you.